3 U.S. cities selected for the Manhattan Project worked in secrecy to build the deadly weapon from scratch. Oak Ridge was one of them.
It was 1945 when the Manhattan Project changed everything, but not just with the bomb. Deep inside desert bunkers and quiet labs, the project became the blueprint for a modern security state built on secrecy, deception, and human experiments for which no one volunteered. The people behind this operation weren't only splitting atoms, they were crafting systems of control that still run under the radar nearly 80 years later. Some secrets were buried so well that they rewrote the textbook. You still think these tactics died with World War II. But before we expose how this blueprint of deception shaped our world, we need to understand what really happened in those final months of World War II, when German cargo vanished into America's atomic arsenal. 7. The Nazi Uranium. It was May of 1945 when a long grey submarine surfaced off the coast of Newfoundland, cutting through the Atlantic's cold dawn as if it were on just another patrol. But U-234 was no ordinary U-boat. On board were German officers and 2 Japanese naval passengers, their eyes sunken from weeks underwater, clutching crates marked with a black cross. In those crates sat 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, carefully sealed in gold-lined barrels, meant to help Japan finish its own atomic bomb. Captain Johann Fehler had made a choice that few U-boat commanders ever made. He decided to surrender to the Americans instead of continuing the journey to Japan. Maybe it was the realization that the war was over, or maybe it was the fear that the Allies would hunt him down if he tried to slip through. The crew climbed onto the deck, hands raised, as American sailors boarded, rifles ready, expecting torpedoes or sabotage. They found no resistance, only crates, documents, and a cargo that would vanish before anyone could truly understand its worth. Once those barrels left the dock, they were marked classified and disappeared into the Manhattan Project's shadow world. The official paperwork hinted at their presence at Oak Ridge, where American scientists were racing against time to enrich uranium for a single bomb they hoped would end the war. But if you track the timeline, the surrender of U-234 happened just as the Manhattan Project faced a desperate shortage of enriched uranium, needing every gram they could find to build what would become Little Boy. Think about that for a moment. It is entirely possible that the uranium carried by Hitler's last submarine, meant to help Japan fight America, was instead used in the bomb that fell on Hiroshima, helping end the war that Nazi Germany started. Historians like Joseph M. Scalia have spent years piecing together the logs, the shipment papers, and the testimonies of crew members who watched those barrels get wheeled away, never to be seen again. It is one of those twists in history that makes you pause. Hitler's final gift to the world, if you want to call it that, might have been helping to end the war he started, in the most devastating way possible. But stolen uranium was just the beginning of the Manhattan Project's dark secrets. What happened when workers started asking too many questions? 6. The Terror Campaign. In the summer of 1944, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, buses arrived each morning, unloading young women in plaid skirts and pinned-up curls onto a landscape that looked like any small American town, except it was fenced, guarded, and humming with secrets.
For almost 30 years, these tours have covered the history of these key locations, all connected to the Manhattan Project.
These young women became known as the Calutron Girls, hired to sit at panels with dials and gauges, turning knobs for hours under buzzing fluorescent lights, never told what they were measuring, only that it was important for the war. Among them was a 19-year-old who liked to sneak a cigarette by the fence on lunch breaks, watching the hills fade into the distance. One day, she leaned to her friend and whispered, "Do you ever wonder what we're actually making?" Her friend glanced around, then shrugged, and they both laughed, brushing it off. That was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, her bunk was empty, her clothes neatly folded, her badge gone. Rumors spread fast in a place where rumors were not welcome. Some workers were told she had gone home to care for a sick relative. Others heard a different story, one about poison moonshine, that she had drunk from the wrong jar at a dance and died. buried quietly under the dirt roads of Tennessee. But people knew how security worked at Oak Ridge, where guards followed workers home, men in plain clothes stood outside church services, and where questions disappeared along with the people who asked them. Behind the smiling posters and the dances at the rec hall, Oak Ridge was a machine built on fear. Workers would receive lectures about loose talk, with supervisors warning that sabotage was everywhere. The fear grew when workers started seeing security jeeps outside their homes at night, headlights cutting through the dark. Once, a worker asked a supervisor if the dial she was turning had anything to do with uranium. The supervisor stared at her for a long moment, then simply said, "Do your job, and you will stay safe." The Manhattan Project was desperate to keep its secrets, even if it meant scaring its own people into silence.
Robert Oppenheimer developed the first nuclear weapons as part of the Manhattan Project. We've been telling about the Manhattan Project and how crucial
security created stories of mysterious illnesses and fatal accidents, never proven, but always whispered. It was psychological warfare, but not against enemy soldiers overseas. It was against American citizens working for a project they believed would end the war, all while living in constant fear that one wrong question could erase them forever. But this culture of silence wasn't just about protecting bomb secrets. It was hiding something even more sinister. The Manhattan Project was preparing for a type of warfare so horrific that it would make nuclear weapons seem merciful. 5. Operation Peppermint. It was the spring of 1944 when a convoy of army trucks rolled through quiet English roads carrying something no one would talk about, covered in tarps, guarded by men who looked straight ahead. They were not moving rifles or grenades. They were moving Geiger counters and lead-lined boxes, preparing for something the public would not learn about for decades. The project was called Operation Peppermint, and on the surface, it was meant to protect Allied troops from a Nazi dirty bomb. American intelligence feared that Hitler's scientists would scatter radioactive dust across the beaches of Normandy as the Allies stormed ashore, poisoning soldiers without a single visible wound. Soldiers were trained to look for strange powders on roads and fields, and they were told to wash off immediately if they felt an odd warmth on their skin. Generals assured them it was just a precaution, but in truth, it was more than that. While the army prepared to defend against a Nazi radiological attack, American scientists within the Manhattan Project were quietly exploring their own dirty bomb designs. They called them radiological weapons, but in plain terms, these were bombs meant to scatter radioactive material over cities, contaminating water, soil, and air, making places unlivable for years. In 1945, a test was conducted using 108 tons of conventional explosives mixed with radioactive substances, observing how winds carried particles, how they settled on fields, and how far the contamination could spread. Edward Teller, the physicist later known for helping develop the hydrogen bomb, was among those who supported the idea of using radiological weapons, suggesting they could be effective in making large areas of enemy territory unusable, forcing populations to flee. Teller and others argued that these weapons could be cheaper than atomic bombs and could spread fear without flattening entire cities. The research did not stop when the war ended. The concepts born under Operation Peppermint followed scientists into the Cold War, where radiological weapons were quietly considered as a tool for warfare alongside nuclear missiles. Files remained classified, and even today, details are scattered in declassified documents and testimonies from those who worked in the shadows of the Manhattan Project. They were not just building bombs to end cities. They were creating weapons designed to poison the Earth itself for generations, crafting a legacy of silent contamination that would leave landscapes empty and people terrified of rain, dirt, and even the air they breathed.
The atomic bombs left unbelievable devastation in Japan, killing an estimated 200,000 people.
But as American scientists plotted radioactive warfare, enemy spies were stealing every secret they could find. But one spy remained hidden for 70 years, and his story changes everything we thought we knew about nuclear espionage. 4. The Fourth Spy. Oscar Sabora stepped off the bus, boots crunching on the gravel outside the Manhattan Project gates. As the guards gave him a quick glance and a nod, he blended in easily among the engineers and scientists streaming into work, each carrying their own secrets behind carefully neutral faces. The site buzzed with the low thrum of generators and quiet voices. In this place, everyone acted like they were building something to save the world, even if no one was allowed to say what that something was. Sibora was a young electrical engineer, quiet, unassuming, someone who worked on the intricate circuits of the implosion bomb that would later be dropped on Nagasaki. He checked detonator wires, ran voltage tests, and made sure the circuits would fire in perfect symmetry when the moment came. No one paid him much mind. They were too busy, too focused on deadlines, and too confident in the security clearances they handed out, like candy to anyone with the right credentials and a steady hand. They didn't know that Oscar Sibora was already working for someone else. He had been recruited by Soviet intelligence, operating under the codename Godsend. And what a godsend he turned out to be for the Soviets, handing them the electrical secrets they needed to understand America's most powerful weapon. While people today remember the 3 known atomic spies, Klaus Fuchs, David Greenglass, and Theodore Hall, for 70 years, no one has talked about the 4th. No one even admitted he existed. In 1951, Sibora quietly slipped away with his brother Stuart, crossing borders until he landed in the Soviet Union, where he lived out his life under a different name. The FBI and intelligence agencies discovered his defection by 1955, yet the American public was kept in the dark. Files remained sealed, and any mention of Sibora disappeared into locked drawers and redacted reports. While conspiracy theories swirled around the mysterious Perseus, a mythical spy many believed had operated inside Los Alamos, it was later revealed that Perseus was likely Soviet disinformation, a phantom meant to distract from the real leak. All the while, Sibora, the quiet engineer with wire cutters and voltage meters, was the true 4th spy, hiding in plain sight, delivering critical bomb details to America's greatest rival. For 70 years, the government let us believe there were only 3 atomic spies. They let us think the Manhattan Project was a fortress breached only a few times, not realizing one of the biggest leaks came from a man who checked detonator circuits by day and passed secrets to Soviet handlers by night. Imagine living your life, reading your history books, hearing news reports, believing you knew the whole story, only to find out the truth was edited out, hidden under layers of bureaucracy and Cold War paranoia. But espionage wasn't the strangest threat facing America's nuclear facilities. While Sibora slipped secrets across oceans, something else was watching from the skies, something that made even the architects of the atomic bomb pause and wonder if they were not alone in this world. 3. The green fireballs. Night settled over the New Mexico desert, but the skies above Los Alamos were far from empty. Scientists and security guards glanced upward, expecting the cold glow of stars. However, what they saw made even the most logical men question reality. Floating above the mesas, near the fences lined with armed patrols and secrecy, glowed green orbs that moved in ways no aircraft should. They hovered, zipped sideways, and shot straight up into the darkness, then stopped without slowing, as if gravity had no say in the matter. From the late 1940s into the early 1950s, these green fireballs appeared again and again, sometimes described as perfectly round, other times as teardrops, their light as vivid as burning copper against the night sky. Witnesses said they traveled in absolute silence, crossing the skies near Los Alamos, Sandia, and other nuclear facilities that held America's most carefully guarded atomic secrets. Reports piled up. Soldiers and lab workers scribbled down details in guarded notebooks, and these sightings were not from 1 or 2 conspiracy theorists in the desert. These were reports from the men who had split the atom, scientists trained to measure the weight of a single neutron, men who lived by data, now looking up in confusion. Even Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, began to consider that these green lights might not be of earthly origin, thinking, just for a moment, that they could be something watching from beyond. In response, the Air Force launched Project Twinkle, a serious investigation aimed at tracking these lights. They placed observation posts, radar, and cameras around hot zones, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was intruding near America's atomic heart. Project Twinkle gathered data for 2 years, but the results only deepened the mystery. The fireballs often moved too fast or too erratically for their instruments to capture clearly. Some nights, the lights danced above the labs, then vanished as quickly as they arrived. Then, just as the investigation seemed ready to break through, the green fireballs disappeared. The Air Force closed Project Twinkle quietly, classifying the results, leaving many to wonder what they had discovered in those night skies that forced them to shut the doors and walk away. But while strange lights flickered over Los Alamos, the real horror of the Manhattan Project was taking shape in hospital rooms across America. The experiments they ran on innocent patients, without their knowledge, would make every other secret look merciful by comparison. 2. The human experiments. Hospitals should have felt like safe places, even in the closing months of World War II, right? Well, not for all. For some patients, those sterile hallways became something else entirely. They became places where the Manhattan Project's secrets slipped quietly into human veins, turning sick Americans into unwilling test subjects in the name of atomic science. Between 1945 and 1947, 18 people were injected with plutonium without being told what was happening to them. Some were soldiers, some were elderly, some were women facing illnesses they barely understood, and all were powerless to refuse. Doctors labeled them chronically ill so they could justify these tests, and no one explained that they were becoming radioactive from the inside out. At the heart of this was J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, who personally signed off on these experiments in a letter dated March 29, 1945. He argued that to truly understand the long-term effects of plutonium, scientists needed to measure how it moved inside living human beings.
The manifest causes of conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, which have bedeviled us for 20 years.
It was a cold calculation wrapped in medical language. However, it still led to real people becoming living data points for the atomic age. These injections were not small doses either. The tests tracked how plutonium settled in bones, how it affected the bloodstream, and how it could poison organs over time. Researchers observed these patients, drawing blood, measuring radiation levels, and recording notes while telling the subjects almost nothing about what was happening. And it did not end there. The Manhattan Project's reach extended to pregnant women, to prisoners, even to children in some hospital wards, all under the same justification that these people would die anyway. So why not use them to further atomic science? But many of those injected did not die immediately. They lived with the effects, often without ever knowing what was done to them. These experiments remained hidden in classified reports for decades, buried under security clearances and quiet files in dusty archives. When the truth finally emerged, it painted a dark picture of the atomic era, one where scientific progress was weighed above human dignity, and where the people entrusted to heal became the instruments of silent harm. But while the atomic scientists experimented on living Americans, a secret far more audacious was unfolding behind the scenes. It was a heist so bold that, if it had been exposed, it could have crashed the entire United States economy. 1. The $14.7 billion Silver Heist. Most people think of the Manhattan Project as a race to build the atomic bomb, but what they do not realize is that it nearly bankrupted the United States in the process, and no one told the public. In the early 1940s, as engineers rushed to split atoms and harness uranium, they ran into a problem that could have ended the entire project before it even began. They needed miles of wiring for the electromagnetic separation of uranium, but copper was in short supply. The war effort had drained almost every warehouse, every factory, every scrapyard. So the scientists and generals turned to the Treasury with a request that sounds almost unreal. They asked to borrow silver, not a few bars for lab equipment, but nearly America's entire strategic reserve. 14,700 tons of silver were moved from Fort Knox, measured by the troy ounce, and hauled under armed guard to the top-secret Y-12 plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. If you want a sense of how much that really was, it would be worth over $14.7 billion today. They used this silver to build calutrons, massive machines that could separate uranium isotopes needed for the bomb. They bent, welded, and shaped it into wires and magnets. Every flake that fell to the factory floor had to be swept up and weighed, because the Treasury demanded every ounce returned. Engineers and soldiers worked around the clock under extreme secrecy, all while carrying out one of the largest financial gambles in American history. Had the project failed, the United States would have been left with a massive debt and a depleted silver reserve in a world on the brink of economic chaos. And yet, the public never knew. The silver heist of the century remained hidden, buried beneath the classified labels of the atomic age, even as it fueled the machines that powered the bomb that ended the war. They did not just build the atomic bomb, they bet America's entire silver stockpile on it. These secrets reveal a pattern that is so disturbing that it forces us to question everything we thought we knew about the price of American power. If they hid this, what else have they hidden? Stay curious and ready, because this rabbit hole goes much deeper.